Hi, everyone. We're going to do something new today, different from other things on this channel, but we're going to do a series that's a journal club. Do you want to explain what a journal club is?
Yeah, but before we do, let's introduce ourselves.
Okay, let's introduce ourselves. Now, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so my name is Marie Jensen, and I'm actually a current student physical therapist at Tufts University, and I am on track to graduate with my doctorate of physical therapy in August of this year.
And you have a master's degree
in health and exercise
science, and you've published a bunch of times in the natural sciences, a lot of biomechanics, things like that. And you're an IFBB professional bodybuilder. So there's a lot of additional accolades that to decorate your resume with. And then I'm Courtney Jensen. We're obviously married. And I'm a tenured professor. The two topics that I teach are epidemiology, which is mostly statistics at the population level, and physiology, muscle physiology, stress physiology, so how do cells behave. And so what we're going to be getting into is dissections of literature. So do you want to explain how we're going to go about that?
Yeah, so a journal club essentially. So when I started at Tufts, they showed us a journal club and what it is and how to go about it. And I love it because I like research and I like learning. And so essentially what a journal club is like a book club in a way. But instead of dissecting a book and talking about it, you kind of just go through a research article that's published, peer-reviewed, and you kind of just go through the introduction, the methods, the statistical analysis, and then conclusion. And you really just go and dissect it from intro to conclusion. And you see, is this sound? Is this article sound? What does it mean? Where can future research go, and what are the implications of the study?
Yeah, so it's a really comprehensive book club where you get together and just dissect every word. And I mean, we each have a printed out one, and I really took the scalpel to this. Every single one of these episodes is going to be about video games, so we're going to be looking at the video game research, and we won't have a big preamble like this every time where we introduce ourselves. We'll just get into the article. But the first article we've decided to go with came out in 2007, and it was made famous in November of 2024 because Joe Rogan talked about it. Now, let's show the Joe Rogan clip now.
I was reading this study about surgeons where they found that surgeons who regularly play video games make less errors.
Well, video games require manual dexterity, so it makes sense.
Completely makes sense.
Actually, if somebody was epic at video games, I'd say their surgical skills can be very good, because in order to be good at video games, any kind of fast reaction video games.
Look at this: 32% fewer errors, 24% faster, and scored 26% better overall than their non-player colleagues.
Oh, I believe that for sure.
That's incredible.
Well,
you should be required in medical school to play video games. Don't you think?
If somebody's a top-ranked video game player and they say they're a surgeon, I'd be like plus one, plus two type of thing.
Oh, top rank for sure. Well, but this isn't even top rank. This is just people who play.
Well, your manual dexterity has to be extremely high.
Yes.
So you're looking at things on a screen. You're reacting, and sometimes you got 10 milliseconds to react.
Yes.
And so if somebody's got incredible reaction times and manual dexterity, they're obviously going to be a good surgeon.
Imagine if there was a course that you could take. That course would promote, you would be 26% better.
Yeah.
Everyone would have to take that course.
Sure.
Why would you want a surgeon that's less prepared? You would say, hey, Bob, did you take this course? You didn't take this course. Don't you understand this course makes you 26% better?
Sure.
You would have to take it. Everyone should have to play video games if you want to be a surgeon.
Okay, so what Joe Rogan said essentially is all physicians should be required to play video games as a part of surgical training. But we're going to explore the article itself and see if Joe Rogan is correct in his assessment of what the article actually means, or if there's nuance here that maybe that's not the takeaway from it. Now, obviously, both of us are huge video game enthusiasts. I mean, you're wearing Tanuki. I have Dragon Quest 2, although Dragon Warrior 2 is what I prefer, the Warrior days. But we're both in the sciences, in a clinical side, in a faculty side. And I mean, I've published over 100 times. I've even written a chapter in a research methods book. And I really get into the research methods, the scientific method. Is it sound? What can we extract from an article? Now, first off, the article itself, I'll show an image. And so we'll put in some images along the way so you can follow along. And we'll put a link to the article in the description.
That way you guys can read along with us. So we're going to start with the title and introduction, and feel free to follow along as we go.
Yeah, follow along. You can pause us and read. But I'm going to be reading parts of it, and you're going to be chiming in along the way. I mean, I've really marked mine up. There's a lot of...
Kind of show them, like, all of his
Like,
markings.
every page is super marked up. I mean, now, this
Very
first page is just the abstract. And the abstract doesn't need a lot of markings. But the title is The Impact of Video Games on Training Surgeons in the 21st Century.
Now, briefly explain to the audience what an abstract is.
Okay, so you write the abstract after you write the article. An abstract is usually about 300 words long, give or take. It depends on the journal, but it's somewhere in the range of about 300 words, and it's a summary of everything you did. There's a background or an introduction to it that might be a sentence or two. There's methods that try to explain what they did. There's a results section that's tiny that tries to explain at least most of the major findings. You can't get them all and everything in 300 words. And then there's conclusions. And let me just read the conclusions of this article. I quote, "Video game skill correlates with laparoscopic surgical skills. Training curricula that include video games may help thin the technical interface between surgeons and screen-mediated applications such as laparoscopic surgery. Video games may be a practical teaching tool to help train surgeons." Now, there are no results listed there, but in the results, in the abstract, there's one paragraph of results that are more detailed in the paper, and so we'll get to that. But first off, the authors, I just want to acknowledge that it's a bunch of MDs and one PhD.
Meaning that the MDs were the ones, the laparoscopic surgeons probably.
Yeah, they're probably the surgeons.
Yeah.
They're on the clinical side. Maybe there was like a head of a department in there who's just on everything.
Yeah. And the PhD is more than likely the one running the statistical analyses.
Yeah, so the PhD is probably the statistician. And I'll come back to this idea of MDs versus PhDs and their roles in research. But the brief summary is the PhDs are probably running all the stats. Now, the journal itself is good. This is a good journal.
Which journal is it?
Archives of Surgery. So this journal, technically by this name, it doesn't exist anymore. Now it's JAMA Surgery, Journal of the American Medical Association. Yeah. So this has always been within the JAMA network. This is but Archives of Surgery is what it was called in 1920. It was founded in it's over 100 years old, this journal.
Do you know the impact factor? Mm-hmm. And then can you briefly explain what an impact factor is?
Yeah, so an impact factor is a measurement of how many, sort of an average measurement of citations. So other researchers are going to do research in the future, and as they're surveying the literature that has come before in their introduction, we'll talk about the introduction section, they may cite what is known. So research is an accumulated knowledge of just a ton of tiny findings. Mm-hmm. And so what you do in an introduction section is you explain what is known. Here's what's known about my topic, the breadth of information. And then you settle on a gap in the literature. Here's what actually isn't known in the literature. And then you move forward with your methods. Maybe you have a purpose statement and then you get into your methods.
Yeah. So typically, like almost always, in the introduction, at the end of the introduction is where you'll find the aim or the purpose or the hypothesis of this study or whatever study you're reading.
Right. And as you just finished reading all about what is known in the field, and as you're reading about what is known in the field, there's a bunch of citations. These authors found this, like these people et al. Found that. And each one of those is a citation. An impact factor is a citation index. So a journal with a high impact factor means lots of people. That's high impact research. Lots of people are citing that.
So the higher the better, correct?
So the higher the better. And so this came out in 2007. Then it had an impact factor of 3.5. That is good. That is good. Now, just lately, it's over 15. It's huge. This is
Okay,
a
what's the
huge.
highest that, like, in theory?
Yeah, I mean, you can get to like 100. I mean, look at New England Journal of Medicine. It's the oldest, it's continuously running journal, and they publish original research, and that's really the top journal. You can look at New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, Science, Nature. There's a lot of journals that are really high impact. Now, there are some other journals that just publish meta-analyses. That's cheating. Okay, to get an impact factor, that's cheating. And so we're going to be going over original research for the most part. We will get into some meta-analyses, we'll get into systematic reviews, but we're going to be looking at for video game research some original studies, and this is one of them. But the one thing to note about this is the original on the editorial board. William J. Mayo was on this. I mean, he wrote the original editorial, and that's Mayo, founder of the Mayo Clinic, one of 7 founders of the Mayo Clinic. And so the first editorial in this journal was written by one of the founders of the Mayo Clinic. And so this has a high reputation, an esteemed reputation for over a century, this journal. So it is a good one. But let's get into the introduction, what is known at this point.
Perfect.
Now, this came out in 2007. Okay, in the 90s and early 2000s, most of the literature was like it was parents who didn't like their kids playing video games. Like, oh, you're like playing Mario all the time and you got a bad score on your social studies test. Mario is to blame. And so the literature in the 90s was really biased. I mean, parents grinding their axe against their kids, and the literature wasn't well done, the analyses weren't well done, the methods weren't effective, and you get into the, 2005, 6, 7, and it starts to look at, well, what are the benefits of video games? And this is 2007. And so it begins by saying, sales, video game sales. So this just paints the portrait of where we are in the world when this came out. In the U.S., have annually reached $10 billion in 2002. Now today it's like $250 billion.
Yeah.
The whole
Huge
world
market.
over.
Yeah.
Huge market. Back then, but 10 billion in the U.S. was pretty big back then. And it said adolescents, 94% of them play video games for an average of 9 hours a week, but it's 13 hours for boys. They don't say what the girl hour is.
Yeah.
But if boys are 13, then presumably, and then the mean is 9, presumably girls are playing considerably less. But the average age of a video gamer back then is 29 years old. So this isn't something for 12-year-olds. This isn't 10-year-olds. Or the average age of a video gamer when this article came out was 29.
Which is interesting because I was playing video games and I was like way younger than 29 at that time. So.
Yeah, I mean, I have been playing since the original Nintendo.
Yeah. So I wonder how they got those statistics, but
Yeah.
anyways,
Yeah, there's some sample of the population probably where they just sent out almost like a census question where they might get 1,000 different people and ask them if they play video games and get a percentage and just make some sort of supposition, an inference about the larger population. So we're going to be using some statistical terms throughout, and I hope you'll stop me if I
I will. I'll definitely stop him to have him explain, right? Because these words may be new to most people. I know they were new to me not that long ago, so bear with us. And if there is a term that we use that we didn't really explain and you want to know more about, just type it in the comments and ask, and we'll be sure to explain it to the best of our ability.
Yeah, so I mean, I teach epidemiology and research methods at undergraduate and graduate levels, and so sometimes I might be breezing over things, assuming they're common knowledge, just because I've been talking about it for years. But yeah, try to.
I will stop you.
Stop me. Okay, so then it goes more into the introduction, where it talks about some of these 90s and early 2000s studies where it says disturbing negative correlations with video gameplay include, and then it talks about all these things that parents are concerned with.
Disturbing negative correlations.
It goes into all these like aggressive thoughts, emotions, physical fights, decreasing positive pro-social behaviors. It just has all these things that parents would disapprove of, but these aren't really compelling studies that they were doing. I mean, it really was just, let me try to get my opinion into the scientific body of work. Now, we can talk about some of those studies at some point, but it does counterbalance that with positive benefits after it lists all of these subjective, not really quantified outcomes. It says positive benefits of video game play include increased performance on eye-hand coordination tasks and neuropsychological tests, and better reaction time, spatial visualization, and mental rotation. I think most of those probably make sense to like hand-eye coordination, but like mental rotation, maybe people don't know.
Yeah, so mental rotation, what that means is just like how can you visualize objects in 3D space? Like, can you place items pretty much visually in your mind in 3D world? So, if that makes sense. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so an example of this would be, so if any of you guys have played Tears of the Kingdom, you probably experienced the mental rotation. So you have to move objects around in 3D space. And oh my gosh, the first time I did it, my brain was not used to it. And so like I was telling Courtney, I was like, man, my brain is hurting like right here doing these activities in this game. And yeah, I got used to it, but yeah, mental rotation.
Using your hand and that sort of like blue magic stream to rotate objects around.
So I'm sure my mental rotation from that game improved.
Yeah, was trained. And that's a lot of what we're talking about video games when we go through these. It's sort of a specificity of adaptation. Whatever it is you're doing, you're training that specific thing. And so something like mental rotation, hand-eye coordination, these can be trained with video games. There's ample opportunity for video games to have a strong, positive effect. But then after talking about that little list of things, it goes into some detail about visual attention and competence, and like simulation skill transfer. Think of like a pilot doing a flight simulator and then transferring that skill to the real world. But then it gets into, because this is on physicians, right? Remember, this is on surgeries. Surgeons. Again, the title is The Impact of Video Games on Training Surgeons in the 21st Century. And so it says, medical errors have become the 8th leading cause of death in this country. You're laughing because you know that this is outdated. As many as 44,000 to 98,000 per year, with an estimated cost of $37.6 billion a year. Now tell us why you're giggling.
Yeah, so I'm giggling because this was in 2007, and now in 2025, medical errors leading cause of death is probably like number 3, I'm gonna guess.
Yeah, it's number 3 according to most research.
Okay,
now, there are some authors who are a little bit more generous who would call it the 4th leading cause of death.
Still.
But most literature, most analyses, most regions, most hospitals, it's the 3rd leading cause of death is medical malpractice. Going to the doctor is your cause of death, and it's an enormous financial burden.
And that's one of the reasons why they're putting it in the introduction, because this is an issue, right?
This is an issue, and how do we train doctors?
Yeah, and how do we improve, how do we decrease these errors?
And so something like laparoscopic surgery, surgery and medical technology continues to advance. It's not like, well, the 1920 this came about, we had like This Side of Paradise, that book came out in 1920, the same year this was founded. Medicine was arrested. We're not going to develop technology, any further from here. Like, that's not, we're going to every single year, new techniques, new equipment, new medications, new everything keep coming out. And there's a learning curve to it. And one of the problems is doctors are different in how they navigate a learning curve. Some doctors are readily equipped to take on new technology. Other doctors are slow in their learning curve. And it gets into this a little bit in the introduction. Now, again, this is laparoscopic surgery. This isn't just all surgeons that we're talking about. And so, what Joe Rogan and the media, personnel are going to say is surgeons.
In general, all surgeons. Heart surgeons, brain surgeons, all surgeons.
Yeah, all surgeons. And what laparoscopic surgery is, I'm sure some of you may have had it before, but it's kind of like a video game where like the Nintendo Wii had 2 different controllers, nunchuck thing and whatever. laparoscopic surgery is sort of similar, where you kind of have two different controllers. Now, one of them controls a video camera at the end of a rod, and it's abdominal and pelvic surgery, and there's very tiny incisions, and one of them is sort of like a video game controller where you're actually doing the work, and the other one is a video game controller where you're controlling the camera, and you're looking up at a monitor, and so it kind of simulates video game play to an extent. I mean, you're watching on the screen and using video game controllers. And so, very small incisions, and the laparoscope is what's sending that over there. So that's the type of surgery that we're looking at. And that's the end of the introduction.
So remember I mentioned that at the end of the introduction, there will be a sentence or two regarding what this study aims to do. So the last sentence of the introduction says, this study correlates participant performance in video games with laparoscopic surgical skills. Now, correlation, what does that mean?
Okay, so correlation is, there's that expression that I can't stand about, correlation is not causation. Really, grammatically, we should be saying causality, but that's not catchy, and so we just have to have these right. But correlation is do two variables move together.
Variables meaning?
A variable is anything that can be measured. So a variable could be like body weight in a weight loss study. It could be strength, in any sort of like a physical therapy study, range of motion in a physical therapy study. Anything that can be measured is a variable. It could be the price of something. The price of eggs is a variable. A variable is anything that can be measured. And a correlation is between these two, like a Pearson bivariate correlation is between these two variables. How strongly do they move together? A positive correlation means they move in the same direction. As one goes up, the other goes up. As inflation goes up, the price of eggs goes up. That's a positive correlation. As one goes up, the other goes down would be a negative correlation.
Body weight and exercise.
Yeah, the more somebody does cardiovascular exercise, something like that, body weight's going to go down. That would be a negative correlation. So a perfect positive correlation, which you're not going to see in statistics, is one. Meaning it's a perfect linear relationship between the two. Negative one is a perfect inverse relationship. As one goes up, the other goes up. It's the exact same amount, like proportional. But like a strong correlation, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, we're getting into some strong correlations. And so what they're looking for is, does video game behavior, your performance, but also your past performance, your past participation, do those correlate with improved laparoscopic surgical skills?
So let's get into the methods now.
Okay, the methods. This is where I have so many notes because...
Let's explain briefly. So the methods is where the authors will explain what the study design looks like. So that way, perfect methods, right, would be where we can replicate this design to the T. Like they explained it so thoroughly that you and I, or you, can do the same exact study.
It's a recipe. Yeah. Here's the recipe. Now, if you're watching the Great British Baking Show, and Paul Hollywood says like, all right, you have to make this thing, here are your notes, and like I can't follow the notes. That's part of being a good chef, is taking limited recipe and making something good out of it. But you have to be able, in research, you have to be able to read the exact methods and just step by step recreate the experiment perfectly, flawlessly, do everything they did. Because
let's use the baking analogy. If somebody says in their methods, we used salt and flour and egg.
Yeah, how much?
I need to know exactly how much. Was it a tablespoon of flour? Was it
the order of combining them?
Yeah,
how long did you stir it, or did you put it in a blender, or did you mash it? You really have to know all these things if you want to replicate the muffin or whatever. But replicating science, this is how we know what is true. It's really the only way. Science informs our beliefs about things. Scientific findings are the basis of belief, and belief informs our decisions, our behavior. So if we want to thrive, our policy, if we want to thrive and be safe, science informs all of that. Whether people think that's the truth, it is the truth. Our beliefs are based on evidence. Evidence largely comes from science and the scientific method. Now there can be some philosophy in there too. There's room. There's some wiggle room for other fields, but the scientific method really is the basis of our behaviors. And so this stuff is important. We have to be able to replicate studies. Otherwise, one person says a thing, and then Joe Rogan's like, this is what it was, and then the world believes that forever. And that could potentially be bad. Or it may be right, but often it can be wrong. So let's get into the methods. 33 surgeons, 21 residents, and 12 attending physicians, 15 men, 18 women. So there's a good distribution of men and women in here, and some of them are residents, so they're going to have less experience, and then 12 are attending physicians. From Beth Israel Medical Center. Okay, so this hospital doesn't exist anymore. It was in New York at the time of this study. That was a hospital in New York, but it is no longer operating. So the specialties of these physicians were general surgery, 22 of them, so most people are general surgeons. Urology, there's only 2 urologists, so there's very limited for that group. And then 9 OBGYNs, so looking at obstetric and gynecological surgery. So mostly general surgery and then some OBs in there, and very little representation of urology. But those are all the surgical fields that are represented. And again, this is laparoscopic surgery. So the attending physicians, they had 12.9 years of surgical experience. The residents had 3.1 years. So the attending physicians, they had 10 more years. It was 13 to 3. They had 10 more years of experience.
Now, pausing this, right? If we were to make our own judgment just based off experience, we would probably assume like, oh yeah, the people who have more years, of experience probably perform better in these surgeries. So keep that thought.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If all you have to go on is, how much experience do you have? Well, I have 10 more years experience than you do. Okay, I'm voting on you. That's if I'm the patient.
Yeah.
And I show up and like, how many years of experience do you have? 3. How many do you have? 10.
I'm gonna go
That
with the
one.
10, but let's keep
Yeah.
reading and see where this takes us.
12 point. It only says the means 12.9 years of surgical experience. I don't know what the standard deviation is. How much variation there is around that 12.9. What if one of the surgeons has been doing this for 48 years?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so there could be some outliers here that they didn't write out the standard deviation that the attending physicians had. The residents probably had a tighter standard deviation.
Okay. What's a standard deviation?
So data, remember, a variable is anything that can be measured. Now, let's say it's height. It's people's height. Measure everyone in the world. No 2 people are identical. Now maybe like a hair's breadth difference, but height includes, the NBA, got some tall people in there. You have like Peter Dinklage is not of NBA height, let's just say.
Yeah.
And so we have wide variation. Now, in most populations, we see bell curves. We see extreme examples on one side, not that many of them. Extreme examples on the other side, not that many of them. Most people are of average. So let's say you're a American male. That average height is 5'9" or something. I don't know what it is. The average height is 5 foot something. But if you just say American men are 5'9", okay, again, we have NBA players. None of them are 5'9",
Yeah.
and then we have Peter Dinklage, who's like that's towering over. And so, if you don't have a standard deviation, American men are 5'9", give or take 4 inches on average. Something like that.
So tell us more is what we're saying.
Yeah, give us more. Tell us a little bit about the distribution of the data, because in height we just assume it's a nice bell curve.
Yeah, but
because
years
we
of
see it.
experience.
Years of experience, and there are only 12 attending physicians. If 2 of them have been doing this for 40 years and the rest of them have been doing it for 5, or so, and so it's important to know what the standard deviation is, or the variance actually would be even better to know. Now, standard deviation is calculated from variance, but variables vary. They have variance. Body weight varies from person to person. Height varies from person to person. There is variance. There's a mean, which is the average. Not that many people are the exact average in anything. There's variance. If the variance is really high, that means there's some outliers.
So when the variance is high, that means like, say, the shorter person, whatever the example you used, and then a basketball player, right? That's a high variance.
We started getting a really high variance. And there's what's called over dispersion, means in any study, okay, remember, standard deviation is calculated from variance. Standard deviation is sort of an average assessment of how much do you expect these things to vary. You know, if it's height, it's 5'9", give or take a few inches, something like that. Standard deviation, a few inches. But variance is a slightly different calculation, can only be calculated from a continuous number, which just means can take on any number of values. Body weight, how much do you weigh? 136.98723 pounds. How much do you weigh? 182.104 pounds. You know, continuous. You need a continuous number to calculate your variance. I guess you could do it from like a discrete, which is like an integer, you know, so it's
like a
1,
whole
2, 3,
number.
4, 5, yeah, whole numbers. But that's the kind of value to calculate variance from. And what you want, if your data look perfect, if you have beautiful data, your variance equals your mean. You find that you just do height, do weight, something like that, you're going to find variance equaling the mean. Now, if variance is huge relative to the mean, you find that a lot too. That's called over dispersion. Under dispersion, you don't see it as often, but that's variance that's smaller than the mean. But often in data, it's either pretty or it's over dispersed. And we don't know here. My hunch is it may be over dispersed. There may be variance that's bigger than the mean, but we don't know because they didn't report it.
So we're left to our imagination.
We're left to our imagination, and let's just give them the benefit of the doubt, even though they're denying us information, which is always suspicious. If you don't put information in, that's suspect.
It's a flag.
It's a flag.
Yeah.
It's a pink flag. It's not a bright red
not
flag.
red, and it's not
It's
yellow.
not blood red, whatever. But it's like a pink flag. So we've already encountered one, and we're in like the second sentence or third sentence or something. So remember, years of experience, attending physicians had about 13 and residents had about 3. The mean number of laparoscopic cases performed by attending physicians was 239 compared to residents was 46. So not just 10 years of experience, but also the number of laparoscopic surgeries performed was considerably higher in the attending physicians. Now, getting into the methods, that was just who they enrolled. Getting into the methods, it says, they use the Rosser Top Gun Laparoscopic Skills and Suturing Program, in parentheses, Top Gun. And it says the goal of Top Gun is to build skill sets for the surgeons, right, to do. And in addition, it teaches surgeons intracorporeal suturing, stitching inside of the body, intracorporeal suturing, perhaps the most challenging task. Thousands of trainees worldwide have validated this course for advanced skill acquisition. And then there's a citation 23. I pulled up that study. First off, I pulled up the website. You watched me pull up the website.
Yeah.
And like, okay, because I have to figure out what this Top Gun thing is. And I pull up the website. I mean, I'll share a clip of this, but it's like weird because there's kind of no information, and it looks like a high schooler's science project, like a computer science. And it says, Top Gun is an unbelievable program. You don't say that if you take yourself seriously. But so I pulled up this study where it says thousands of trainees worldwide have validated this course for advanced skill acquisition, say 23. Now, the journal it's in, it's a 2004 study. The journal it's in, great. Impact factor over 10.
Ooh.
Really good citation.
Better than this one at the time.
And I didn't thoroughly read the study, but I did a Control F and I scanned for the words top and gun. Neither word appeared anywhere in the study.
Oh, interesting.
And I tried, so I'm like, you know what? They didn't do Top Gun. And so I'm scanning, and what it appeared to me was it was a program like Top Gun that they were validating.
Oh.
Now, I'm not saying that's absolute, because maybe Top Gun goes by other names. You know, maybe this it used to have a different name and now it's Top Gun. There could be any number of explanations, but to me, the impression that I got
was a flag.
This was like a white sock that went through the laundry and there was just something red. You know, it has a hint of pink. That they may have been validating something other than the measurement that they used.
Yeah.
Maybe. I'm not saying that's true, but that's the implication. Okay, so then it moves on. This study consisted of 3 elements, which just means 3 different types of analyses, 3 branches of analyzing their findings, but they just call them elements. Element 1 was a questionnaire to assess video game play, surgery experience, and other demographic information. So in the video game portion of the questionnaire, ask questions pertaining to episodes of play, length of time playing, types of games played, and familiarity with specific genres of games. Now, what would have been helpful here? Just tell us the questions.
Yeah, give us the questionnaire in the resources.
Yeah, where is a table that says, here's the questionnaire they received?
Yeah.
Like, that would be helpful because I don't know how these questions were phrased. Maybe the questions were phrased in a leading way. Maybe the questions were phrased in a way they're like, yeah, I guess probably not. If you don't know how the questions are phrased, you can't make any assumptions about how they were answered. You just have to trust them.
But not only that, but like, how can we replicate this? Like, we're gonna make up our own questions.
Yeah, you make up
okay?
your totally own questions, and that's just, I'm sure the questions
Now
were
that's a
phrased
red
fine.
flag.
It is a bit of a red flag, that one, because you can't replicate that. They say, like, here's generally what we asked them. Here's the content topics, the overall overarching themes of the questions were. That doesn't tell us how to replicate this study. So I'm a little bit peeved by that. But they did ask apparently a fair number of questions about games and getting into familiarity with genres of games. So maybe it was like first-person shooters, side-scrolling,
but we don't know.
platformers and
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah. So that was the first element, was a questionnaire. Element 2 was Top Gun itself, which was conducted over 1.5 days. The Top Gun basic skills and intracorporeal suturing courses involve preparatory laparoscopic drills and interrupted suturing on porcine bowel. Porcine, whatever. Porcine. So, like feline means cat. And canine means dog. Lupine is wolf. This means pig. Pork.
I was gonna say porcupines.
Porcupines. So this is either porcupines or just straight up swine. This is swine.
Yeah.
Okay, one other thing in there to mention is interrupted suturing. This isn't what it sounds like. What it sounds like is like you're busy working and you get a phone call, like texts, or like the fire alarm goes off and like, I'll get back to this. I gotta evacuate the building or whatever. Sorry, you're stuck in here while the building burns down. But interrupted suturing. This is just you are doing individual stitches at specific intervals.
Okay.
It's stitches. That's what that means. So don't think of that as anything too complicated, other than doing it like inside the body, which is really difficult and complicated. The preparatory drills emphasize non-dominant hand dexterity, kind of like video games do. Two-handed choreography, just independent hand things. Drummers would be good at this. Two-dimensional depth perception compensation, and targeting. So think you're looking at a screen and trying to get depth perception off of the screen. The first drill, so again, we're talking about Top Gun. There are 3 drills here. The first drill is the Cobra rope drill. It sounds like something out of Cobra Kai. They unwind and pass a string using 2 standardized laparoscopic graspers. The second drill is the terrible triangle drill.
I love the names.
Yeah, the name. This again sounds like something that would be in like a karate training, like a dojo. And this involves lifting and moving 5 triangular objects from one designated point to another by placing a needle through a metal loop atop each triangle using an instrument with a non-dominant hand. I'm not quite sure why it needs to be a triangle if you're just like threading a loop. However, again, what this is meant to indicate is this isn't like Civil War surgery where you have a hacksaw and you're just like lopping off limbs. I mean, this is really delicate, fine motor activity.
Yes.
And the third drill is the cup drop drill, which participants move beans from a designated area into a cup with a 1 centimeter aperture using a standardized laparoscopic grasper in the non-dominant hand. And then I guess there's a fourth thing where interrupted sutures are placed into a porcine intestine or porcine. Let's just call it a porcupine swine intestine. And so those are the things that you do in the Top Gun program. And then it says the time to complete each task is recorded, and an electronic proctor registers and tabulates errors committed. Now, we're not quite sure what the errors committed are. It should give some indication, errors committed by inaccurate instrument movements. But is it like, how inaccurate does it need to be? If it's just like, okay, you got it threaded, that was 32 errors.
Yeah, like we need quantification of what an error means.
Yeah, I don't know what an error quite is. I get it if you're moving beans and you drop the bean halfway, or like you drop it and it doesn't go into the little hole, like a circus, like a carnival game or something like that, and you're just squirting the squirt gun into a clown's mouth and like, oh, you missed the mouth, whatever. Okay, I get what an error like, but I'm not sure exactly what an error means here.
Yeah.
So these variables serve as measurements of performance. Methods keep going. Element 3. So element 1 was a questionnaire. Element 2 was the Top Gun program, that software. Element 3 consisted of playing 3 over-the-counter video games.
This was probably like our favorite thing
We
about
giggled.
it. Like over-the-counter video games.
Yeah, so
like,
printed these out and we were
love it.
reading them. Yeah, we're each reading these things together. We just start giggling. Over-the-counter video games. I do like that it takes it seriously because video games, I truly think video games are the most important medium of storytelling that have ever been developed. I mean, there's novels, there's radio, there's plays, there's movies. I mean, even like movies has a stupid name, but video games, the name video games implies like, oh, this is a little thing for kids or whatever. And this is, I think, the climax of human achievement in storytelling is that I will talk. That's not the point of this. I talk about that stuff on my channel all the time. Let's stick with this. Over-the-counter video games. The point is, I like that it gave them sort of a medicinal clothing. So the subjects were taken in groups of 3 for 25 minutes of video game play. But they're playing one-player games. Why are they going in groups of 3? I don't understand this.
Maybe they had 3 different consoles, and so they all played.
They do.
Okay.
I think you figured that out because I was like, reading this. Why would they be taking? And so 25 minutes of video game play. But yeah, so they're taken in groups of 3 to play the 3 different games. That does make sense. Okay, I don't have any qualms about that then. Of 33 subjects, now this I have qualms with. This is the biggest flaw, I think, in the whole thing, this next sentence. Of 33 subjects, 8 completed the video game tasks after having participated in Top Gun between 12 and 24 months previously. Okay, and they're making a correlation of how good are you at these video games, and does that skill correlate strongly with Top Gun, which you did 2 years apart?
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
You can't do that. That is not science. That's outrageous. And so what that means is out of 33 subjects, 8 you really have to exclude from analysis because that's ludicrous. Now, it's between 12 and 24 months. Maybe 7 of them were exactly a year away. And only one of them was exactly 2 years away. But my hunch is most of them were like 18 months apart when they did these 2 trials.
The thing was, they did Top Gun, right? And then 12 months later, they did these video games, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so they did Top Gun, and they got all of that. And then 12 to 24 months later, which means at least one person was 2 years later, and everyone else was at least 1 year later, went and played some video games. You cannot make that correlation.
Yeah.
Like maybe they became video game players in the intervening time, or maybe they stopped being video game players.
A lot of things, yeah.
Maybe they got arthritis, and we have no idea.
Yeah.
So you cannot do that. Now, can you do it a month apart? Yeah, there's probably not too much change over the course of 1 month. That's fine. 2 months, you really need a good justification for why 2 months went by. 2 years, outrageous. You can't do that. So the truth is, there are 25 subjects in this study.
So that's flag number 3.
That's like the flag is dripping blood. That one. You have 25 reasonably good subjects, which we don't know much about because there's no table 1. So in a study, table 1 is a demographic characteristic that explains everything between the groups. So table 1 in this case might have a few different groups, video game players, non-video game players, current video game, past video game, non-video game players, and here's their age, and here's their resident sex. There's handedness they list, like here's how many people are left-handed.
Only 3.
Yeah. So there aren't very many people who are like that. But that's probably representative of the percentage of left-handed people in society. I'm sure there's something representative about that. But they get into handedness, but they don't tell you the important information divided into these groups. And
so no tables
flag
at
4.
all in this study. And
I
love
no
tables.
No tables is not. I wouldn't say it's a red flag, but it's
not
a
a
huge
red flag. No, but
it's a huge flaw that your study's terrible if you don't have a table 1.
To me, it just seems like it's just a little
You're
lazy.
denying, it's lazy, but you're denying the reader information that is required to make the assumptions that you do. You are unable to, I'm unable to ride that bike, that tandem bike with them because like I don't know what the assumptions, I can't see the data for myself. And so I have to trust where you're going. Like I'm like blindfolded here and I just have to take your words for it. This is crazy. Okay, so that was the worst sentence in the entire thing, I think. Those 8 patients or participants were not selected and were not members of the original study. So this is also weird. Like, so they just joined the study a year to 2 years later, and they weren't like selected. I don't get it. I don't. Those 8 subjects, I would exclude them completely from analysis.
Yeah.
And now maybe they did the questionnaire and the questionnaire works and stuff like that. I mean, if they did the questionnaire and Top Gun at the exact same time, you can analyze that, but you cannot analyze those subjects in terms of the active video game play correlating with Top Gun. You cannot do that. All other participants completed all elements at the same time. Good, you have 25 subjects in your study. Don't even call it 33. Participants were given a standard set of instructions and a brief demonstration and then asked to begin play. That's fine. That's enough detail.
Yeah.
That's satisfactory.
But I would like to know what the standard set of instructions were because, once again, if I wanted to replicate this, I need to know that. So
It would be helpful. Well, that's
Yeah.
our. 3 representative games were selected from 100 of the most popular video games. I actually think they did a good job here. I think they did a good job. The skills tested by these games included fine motor control, visual attention processing, spatial distribution, reaction time, eye-hand coordination, targeting, non-dominant hand emphasis, and 2-dimensional depth perception compensation. So there's kind of 8 variables that they were selecting these video games by. And then importantly, games were also selected based on their ease of measurement and lack of bonus scores, which could skew data. So think about like if there's some random allocation of points that's going to mess up skill, what you want is a game where precision corresponds to point accumulation or something like that. And it's very precise. It's replicable from person to person. That's what you want. And they acknowledge that they were choosing games that fit those criteria. I think they did a good job here. 2 games were scored purely as total time to complete, while the third measured total targets hit. None of the subjects had ever played any of the video games used for the study. Also important, super important. Otherwise, those subjects would be like excellent at the games, and everyone else would just be terrible, and that would be incredibly biased. So here are the 3 games.
So that, in a way, is a standard approach.
They did a good job.
Yeah.
We can applaud what they did in the study here. The first game, Super Monkey Ball 2 on the Nintendo GameCube. Retro Bird would love that. If the course was not completed, doing a course as a timed course, if the course was not completed in 300 seconds, a value of 300 seconds was assigned. Here's where this is a flag. It doesn't say anywhere what the value was. And so, let's say there's 25 people. And I'm assuming they're using all 33 people, which is inappropriate. But let's say there's 25 people who did it. Maybe 18 of them had a score of 300. The worst score, and then a couple other people had a really good score. If some people had a really good score, and then a bunch of people had exactly 300 because that's the worst score, we have no idea what anyone's score was.
Yeah. Again, because no tables.
No tables. And what you should have is tables that say, here's the mean and the standard deviation. And you could also, I would put in a minimum maximum value. So we know like how many people hit 300 because the variance is affected if it's like, here's a few good scores and everyone else is tied. That's statistically inappropriate to do the analyses using that as a predictor, using it as an independent variable. I'll talk about that later. The second game was Star Wars Racer Revenge on the PlayStation 2. So the first game was on GameCube. Second one is on PlayStation 2. So we're using different controllers, which I think is important.
Different consoles.
Different controllers, and different types of games. The score was total time to complete a single lap. All games were viewed on either a 51 centimeter television monitor or a 46 centimeter flat screen monitor. And this is the Sony Trinitron. such as those used in laparoscopic surgery. Now, what I like about this is the most classic CRT, the cathode ray tube television. If you're going to do kind of old school gaming, CRTs are kind of essential for like graphical fidelity. They don't look the same if you're using one of today's TVs, and so I think it's important they use the CRT. Now, where I think this is a little bit weird is some people got a 46 centimeter TV, some people got a 51 centimeter TV. Some people had a flat screen, some people had a curved screen. And if you're doing something with precision, it's a racer game, or you're doing something in timing, what if you can't quite make out some of the obstacles because of the screen differences? That's a confounding variable that is poorly done in this study. Everyone should have used the exact same TV. If you're not using the exact same TV, start the study over.
Yeah, it's not standardized.
So that's another flag here. Because also the TVs, they might have different brightness. They're all sort of two different TVs are going to have very different displays. And displays, when you're trying to do something as fast as possible that you've never seen this track before and you don't know what's going on, you got to be able to see what's happening. And different TVs are going to affect different people differently. Now, but I do like, there's a Sony Trinitron. I used to play Dreamcast on the Sony Trinitron. The third video game was Silent Scope, a Konami game on the Xbox. So a third console, a third different controller. Again, I think they did an excellent job with the video game selection. And so the player shoots as many screen targets as possible in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And the score was the total number of targets hit. Now here's where it gets weird again. A composite video game score averaged the 3 standard video game scores. Participant scores from playing the 3 video games were reversed such that the highest numbers were indicative of better play. The video game skill scale was reliable as measured by the Cronbach alpha equals 0.81. This is fine. This just tests internal consistency. There's better ways to do this. Of the measurement, the internal consistency of the measurement. There's better statistics to do this, but most people don't do it at all. That's fine. What I find a little bit weird here is that they reversed the scores such that higher numbers were indicative of better play. Okay, but the shooting game, the higher number was indicative of better play already. So they reversed all 3 of them. It's as it's phrased. Maybe that's not what they did, but the way they phrased it, that's what they did, where they reverse the scores. Now, the 2 racer games is time to complete, where the faster, so the fewer seconds means better. And so let's make it, so that means, let's flip that. So, but then the shooter game is the more you do, the better. So one of them is the fewer seconds, the other one's the more targets, and it's phrased, they flipped all 3 of them.
Yeah, at least that's what it sounds like.
That's what it sounds like. Maybe they didn't do that, but they shouldn't have written that they did it. And so that is a little bit weird. And then the other thing is, I don't know if the data are normally distributed because they never say that.
Yeah.
Now, again, we talked about this earlier in a population. We have what's called parametric statistics. We have parameters. One of the parameters is the normality, the distribution, where with height and weight and all this stuff, you have this bell curve. And again, I don't know if one person hit 0, if like 12 people hit 0 targets and then a few people hit a bunch of targets, that's not this. That's like, and you can't run statistics if it's like that. And they never say, they don't say anything about the distributions, anything like that. And so that's weird. And then one other thing that's left out of this study is what was the software that they use? I mean, do the SPSS, is it Stata, R? What did they use to analyze this?
Yeah, so typically at the end of methods, they'll talk about what statistical analysis and what software they used to run the stats on, but they did not mention at all at the end of their methods.
So again,
that's where we're at right now.
We just finished the methods, and I don't know how to replicate this. There's so many holes in this study, and again, we love video games. And we want this article to succeed. We want what Joe Rogan said to be true, but we have to be honest about these things. We can't just champion what we want to champion. We have to adhere to the truth, whatever it says. Should we get into the results?
Yep, so now we are going into the results.
Okay, results. Top Gun's, this is the first sentence. Top Gun scores were grouped according to video experience, analyzed, and compared based on 3 criteria. So I'm guessing that's video game experience. They just dropped a word. They just video experience. Yeah. And so there are some categories here. Category 1, they're a current player. Category 2, they're a past player. They don't play now, but they used to. Category 3, those participants with demonstrated skill as measured in the video games outlined previously. And then category 4, these criteria were then compared to participants who had never played video games. So that's a fourth category. So non-players.
So out of all these participants, they did, okay, do you currently play video games? That's one. And then, have you played video games in the past, but don't really play anymore? That's the second. And then the other one is the demonstrated skill.
Yeah, are you good at video games? Yes or no?
Yeah.
And then the fourth one is you've never played.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the basis of comparison, the control group that they'll be comparing it to. And then, so that it just says that. And then it moves into past video game play experience. And now notice at this point in the study, we've gone through the methods, they did not say one statistical model.
Good point. Yeah.
What analyses did you run?
All they said was the Cronbach.
Okay, they did
was
that.
it.
Internal consistency, and like most people don't even do that at all. So it's fine that I don't care that there's like other methods that are maybe a little bit better.
But the aim of the study, remember at the end of the introduction, they said that this is a correlation, but they didn't talk about
What
any of
analyses
that.
are you running? Is this
Yeah.
just Pearson correlation coefficients, which it's not? But that's what this is a correlational study. All right, Pearson correlation coefficients. This is just R's, just R's and P's. That's it. And that's not what they did. But as it gets into the results, it says the results of statistical analyses, and you're like, oh, that's what they did. It didn't say what they did in the methods. You have to say what your analyses are in the methods and what software you use to calculate. They didn't do that. Okay, past video game play experience. Of the surgeons, 19 of them, which is 58%. I'm just going to say the percentage as opposed to numbers and percentages. 58% of the surgeons reported playing video games at some point in the past. 42% reported never playing. Participants reported having played for a mean of 8 years with a standard deviation of 10.2. Here they provide a standard deviation. Now, it's hit or miss whether they're going to provide that.
Yeah.
They should provide it 100% of the time. Every single time, provide the standard deviation. And because it's so suspicious, okay, we'll provide it here, but we're not going to provide it here. Why?
Yeah.
I know you know how to calculate it because it's over here. It's that, but there's like, well, here and not here, and here and not here. And so what's so suspicious is it's probably huge in the ones they left off.
Yeah.
Why else would they leave it off? Oh, I forgot. Like what you didn't forget here, but even here, that the standard deviation is awfully big. When I'm talking about variance you want to equal the mean. If 10.2 were the variance here, then like, okay, yeah, that's just tiny bit over dispersed. But the standard deviation that's bigger than the mean is a pretty broad range. So participants reported having played video games for 8 years, give or take over 10. Which means some people might have only played for 1 year, something like that, and other people might have played for 20 years. Big standard deviation. At the height of video game playing, 15% played between 0 and 1 hours a week, 12% played between 1 and 3 hours a week, 3% played between 3 and 5 hours a week, 15% played between 5 and 10 hours a week, 6% played between 10 and 15 hours a week, and 3% played more than 15 hours a week. Men were historically more likely to play video games frequently, and that is apparently a t-test with a p-value of 0.02. That's not how you calculate likelihood differences. Men were also more likely to have spent more hours per week playing than women. So this is weird because I'm not sure how they're calculating this stuff, but let me first say what these p-values are and mean. So men are more likely to play video games, p equals 0.02. Men play more hours per week, p equals 0.001. Here's another problem. Like, what do you mean 0.02 and 0.001? One of those goes to the thousandth, the other one goes to the hundredth. Always report your p-values to the thousandth. Stop with this nonsense of like, this time we'll say 0.01, this time we'll say 0.03, this time we'll say 0.003. Like, just report what it is to the thousandth. It's weird when they don't do that. I don't know if it's lazy or if it's just weird.
It's just inconsistent.
It's inconsistent and it's just like bizarre. But then if you're going to compare, let me first define a p-value. So the p-value, people think of a p-value as like the probability that something's true. Nope, that's not what it means. A p-value is if the null hypothesis is true, which means there's nothing going on, there's no story. If the story is correlation, there's no correlation. If the story is difference, these two groups are different, there's no difference. The null hypothesis just means nothing is happening here. There's nothing real. In real life, not in the study, because they found something in the study, but in the greater population from which the researchers sampled, so the population would be all surgeons, all laparoscopic surgeons.
Well, 33 of surgeons.
Well, that's a sample. The
Okay.
sample is 25 or 33 laparoscopic surgeons, because we sample 25 from a population of, I don't know, thousands or whatever. And so the null hypothesis talks about the population of all laparoscopic surgeons. So at the population level, if the null hypothesis is true, nothing's going on, there is a p-value % chance that we would have observed the effect we did or something more extreme than that. That's what a p-value means. It's not the odds that it's true. It's not even close to the truth. And so people misinterpret p-values all the time. And so what a p-value of 0.02 means is the likelihood that men play more than women, 0.02. That means if men don't play more than women, there's only a 2% chance that you would have observed a difference this extreme or more extreme than that. Now, they seem to have used a t-test for that, although it's a categorical variable. That should have been a chi-squared analysis. So that's a little bit weird, unless they're just using words like likely to play inappropriately. But the way the results are described here is statistically inappropriate. The next one is analysis of variance. Oh, so by the way, t-test and the chi-squared, we're looking at differences between a couple of groups. In this case, we have men and women. And we're saying, is there a difference in these two groups? If the difference we're looking at is continuous, is there a difference in height? Is there a difference in body weight?
So the numbers.
Is there a difference in score of a video game, something like that? That's a t-test. That's an independent samples t-test, because you have two independent groups, men and women.
And their numbers.
And there's a continuous dependent variable. And then if it is a categorical dependent variable.
Blue or red, yes or no.
Yeah, you win or you lose. You play or you don't play. That's a chi-squared, is what we do.
What we're saying is that they did not use the chi-squared. Even though
it's a t-test for a categorical dependent variable.
It should have been a chi-squared, because the question was,
likely to play.
Yeah,
Do you play? Yes or no?
men play, yes or no, women play, yes or no.
As it's written, that's what they analyzed, and they did it with a t-test. They can't do that. So I don't care what the p-value says. Analysis of variance. So now this is the first time that ANOVA has come up. Now ANOVA, it sounds fancy, analysis of variance. It's just a bunch of t-tests done all at the same time.
So a bunch of groups.
Yeah, so what I said, what an independent samples t-test is, that's what they're doing, but it's doing multiple t-tests in one single analysis.
And now all of this is statistical analyses.
Yeah, so now they're saying here's the analysis we did. Why didn't you set this up in the methods?
In the methods, where it should have been.
Yeah, that's where it should have been.
So analysis of variance.
So analysis of variance compared surgeons who had never played video games to those who reported playing 0 to 3 hours a week, and to those who reported playing more than 3 hours a week. So remember what I said about the t-test. You compare two groups, men versus women, something like that. If you have more than two groups, use the ANOVA. But you just run multiple t-tests at the same time. That's all it's doing. So there's 3 different groups. And I'm okay with how they segregated these groups, because they attempted to have approximately equal numbers of surgeons in each group, 15, 9, and 9. So they're doing all 33 here. And where are we?
The analysis of variance.
The analysis of variance was conducted to test differences between surgeons with different amounts of playtime on time to complete Top Gun drills and the number of errors that they made. So those are the 2 dependent variables, meaning the outcome variables, the outcomes. Now, analysis of variance, they give you the p-values here, which are weirdly reported again. This is so weird, this article. Significant differences emerged for time, p equals 0.03, and errors, p is less than 0.03. Just say what it is. Is it 0.02? 0.01? What is it? It's only less than 0.03. One of them is 0.03 and the other was less than that. No, but you don't do that. This is so weird. Who wrote this? And now, so the ANOVA, what this does, it's what's called an omnibus statistic, which just means the whole thing. Are there different? Because there's 3 different groups. Are there differences between those groups?
What were the groups again?
The groups were don't play a little bit, less than 3 hours, and play a lot, more than 3 hours a week. 3 different
And
groups.
comparing all of them. Right?
Comparing all of them. So are these 3 groups different?
Yeah.
Yes or no, basically. And there's, for time, there's the p-value is 0.03. So the difference is pronounced enough that we are 97% sure that if the null hypothesis were true, that we would achieve something this strong or stronger, right? And then errors less than 0.03. So I don't even know how to read that. But that's an omnibus statistic. It doesn't say which groups are different. Where are those groups different? It just says overall there are differences.
Yeah, there is a difference.
There is a difference. Now, one thing that it doesn't get into here, which it needs to and doesn't, so this is another bloody flag, is we don't know if the assumptions were met for this analysis. And so variance, so the normality, first off, what is the distribution? To run an ANOVA, you need to have a good distribution.
Why?
There are parametric statistics rely on parameters being met, and so again, that's the major parameter. There are several parameters that are required. These assumptions that are necessary, and in ANOVA we have normality, which is about the variances between groups, and so for an ANOVA, there are assumptions that need to be met, and at no point does it say anything about them. It just says the results of these things. And then the other thing that you can't have in an ANOVA is outliers, because outliers bias the results so much, and we don't know if one person was, excellent at this thing, and then a bunch of people were kind of crappy. The one excellent person is the result. And so we don't know this stuff because we don't have the data. They didn't report the necessary data to validate this stuff. And so let's just assume I guess we have to assume that the data are fine, that everything is, up to snuff, up to par or whatever, and it probably isn't. The likelihood that the way they collected the data, the likelihood is it maybe breaches some of this stuff, but they don't say it.
And so then they use the
Bonferroni
test.
Yeah. So what the Bonferoni does is say exactly where do the differences lie. So the omnibus statistic, what they've reported already is, are there differences? Yes or no?
And there was 0.003.
And so or less than that, but who knows how much less. And again, they should have gone to the thousandth. The 100th digit is weird to do. Just go to the 1000th all the time. I mean, they did once, and they just stopped doing that. And so then the Bonferoni says, where do those differences lie? And it actually, this is interesting. I do like their findings. I just don't like how they came about them. And I don't quite trust them, but we'll talk about that more. Surgeons who never played video games took more time to complete the Top Gun drills, 5,224 seconds, than surgeons who played 0 to 3 hours a week, 4,135 seconds, or those who played more than 3 hours a week, 3,802 seconds. So what I like about this is there's 3 different groups: non-players, little players, big players, and it's a linear relationship where the more you play, the faster you are. But only the difference between the 2 extreme groups, never played and most players over 3 hours a week, was significant. P equals 0.03. And also, the more subjects you have, the stronger your significance is going to be. The p-value gets stronger and stronger the more subjects you have, and they don't have that many subjects, and they're already finding this.
Which is fine.
It's fine. It is compelling. This is compelling. Surgeons who never played video games also made more errors. Not only were they the slowest, but they also made more errors in the Top Gun drills. They made 314. Now here's the deal. Again, what does an error mean?
Yeah,
if you do one little thing and you make 314 errors, how dead is the patient? That can't be major errors.
Yeah.
It's okay, how many errors did you make in your last surgery? Oh, just 314. You're in good hands.
Yeah.
I don't want one. I don't want you to make one error if you're doing surgery on me. And so what is an error? I don't know what constitutes an error. If the average number of errors is 314.
Yeah, we don't know. They didn't state it in the methods.
So that was people who didn't play video games. People who played 0 to 3 hours a week, 257 errors, fewer errors. People who played more than 3 hours a week, 197 errors. So again, we're getting lower and lower the more you play. So the more video games you play, the faster you are and the fewer errors you make at the same time. That is compelling. Overall, the Top Gun scores, time and errors of surgeons who played video games in the past were 33% better, P is less than 0.005. So weird. Just tell me what it is. Now, okay, if it's less than 0.001, that's commonly how people report, so you don't have to go to the 10,000th digit. Now, what less than 0.001 technically means is less than 0.0005, because 0.0005 technically equals 0.001 if you round up. But nobody really reports less than 0.0005, but I get it if you do. I've seen it before. Nobody reports less than 0.005, because you just report it's 004 or it's 003. You report what it is. But again, they went to the 1,000th digit there. It's so weird how they did this. My hunch is the statistician ran analyses, gave it to the MD, and the MD didn't know how to interpret results. That's
Maybe,
probably
we don't
what
know,
happened.
but yeah.
If the surgeons were past players who played more than 3 hours a week, they had an overall Top Gun score that was 42% better. So surgeons who played in the past were 33% better. Past players who played more than 3 hours a week were 42% better. P is less than 0.001, not 001, but 0.01. Okay, I like the linear relationship. That tells me there's something real. How they went about getting it and how they went about reporting it, I do not like. Current player video game play experience. Of the surgeons, 36% reported currently playing video games, averaging 19 minutes, 32.8 minute standard deviation. Here they give it to you, the standard deviation. So they play an average of 19 minutes with a, give or take 33 minutes. Okay, that's a big standard deviation. Do a lot of them play 1 minute? That's basically what it means. But the standard deviation is really wide here. It's in one sitting. Maybe they're playing like Pong on a Texas Instrumentals calculator between patient calls or something. It's a weird duration of time to play video games. Men were more likely to play video games frequently. Again, a t-test for a categorical variable. You don't do that. And men had been playing for significantly more time than women. Mean 14.2 and 2.1 years, respectively. So men have been playing for 14.2 years. We have no idea what the standard deviation is here because they decided not to report it. And women have been playing for 2.1 years.
They did give us a p-value, though.
Yeah, P of less than 0.001. That is compelling. And it is, I guess a t-test, depending on, if it probably is a continuous variable. Okay, so current video game players made 32% fewer errors, P equals 0.04, and performed 24% faster. P is less than 0.04. I'm going to stop insulting this. It's so weird. Then their non-video game playing colleagues. So, again, this is just compelling in the way that it really upholds the value of video games here.
So in summary of that section, people who play video games now perform better pretty much
Yeah, they perform better
than people who don't play video games.
There's also a weird thing here that I have a hard time understanding. So, again, let's do these two percentages. So the current players performed 24% faster, and they scored 26% better.
Overall.
Overall.
Time and errors on Top Gun.
Yeah, so time and errors. But I don't quite know the exact calculation. So if it's...
So they
32
just
and
added
26.
the errors and the time, and then they did an average of that.
But that for 26 and 32 is 29.
No, 24 and 32.
24 and 32 is 28. Okay, so 24 and 32 is 28, and they scored 26% better overall. I don't actually know how this is. So time and errors, how do they tabulate that? And the p-value there is less than 0.005, which...
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the actual score is because it's not an average of the two, and they never say how it's calculated.
Yeah.
And the Top Gun website was made by a high school. It's like, okay, let's move on. This I like best: the demonstrated video game scale. Not just try to recall. Your past with video games. How many hours did you play a week 10 years ago? Like that.
Yeah. So not questionnaires. This
But
one.
actually, let's test you.
Yeah.
So Super Monkey Ball 2 showed the highest correlation. R equals 0.63, P is less than 0.001.
Now, explain what R
So
that
R,
represents.
this is a positive correlation, meaning the higher the Super Monkey Ball 2 score, the higher the Top Gun score. Okay, so just remember that because there's going to be some points of confusion coming up. It's a positive correlation. It's a strong one. 0.63, that's nothing to scoff at. That's a strong correlation between skill and suturing ability. So the overall score, I guess this isn't errors or time. This is that score that we don't know how to calculate.
Wait, for which one are you looking at?
The first one, Super Monkey Ball 2. Each video game used to quantify the subject's demonstrated video game skill was highly correlated with laparoscopic skill and suturing ability. Well, which one? I'm assuming it's the score that we don't know how it's calculated because it doesn't say time and it doesn't say errors. But Super Monkey Ball positively correlated with score. Followed by Silent Scope, the R is 0.5, P is 0.003. And in last place was Star Wars Eraser Revenge, the R is 0.48 and the P is 0.004. These are all strong, but here's the deal. Each one of these R's is positive, okay?
Oh, yeah.
Weird. Okay, Super Monkey Ball 2 and Star Wars Racer Revenge, a lower score is supposed to be better. Silent Scope, a higher score is supposed to be better.
Why is that?
That's what they said. That Silent Scope is how many targets, how many you hit. And so the more you hit, that's better. With the
But
others,
the other
the
two,
fewer the seconds it takes to complete.
so the other two's time.
The other
so
two's time.
Shorter time
Is better. And the other one is targets you hit is better. And yet all three have a positive correlation with the same outcome.
Yeah, so in theory, it should be an inverse, meaning a negative.
One of
correlation.
them should be an inverse, and the other two should be or the other one should be positive. But, it depends on how you calculate the Top Gun score. But if they're all a positive correlation, something is fishy.
Yeah. Or they just forgot the minus sign.
Or they forgot the minus sign, but that's sloppy. So something is either weird here or something is really sloppy here. An overall video game scale was also created previously, whatever it is described, was highly correlated with laparoscopic skill and suturing ability. And that's it's the same as the Super Monkey Ball correlation. R is 0.63 and P is less than 0.001. But the overall video game scale, which is previously described, remember they inversed the scale.
The three combined.
The three combined, they flipped it.
Yeah.
But two of them should be low and one of them should be high. And as they described it, they just flipped them all.
Yeah, so that it doesn't make sense.
It makes no sense. And if they just described it inaccurately, you're going to try to replicate the study.
Good luck.
Good luck. So where are we? The laparoscopic suturing ability. Okay, so the overall score and everything. Dividing the participants into tertiles based on their demonstrated video game skill. What this means is groups of thirds. So we all know what a quartile is. We know what a percentile is, divided into groups of 100. First I'm in the top percentile or whatever. Quartiles divided by 4s. Quintiles divided by 5s. Often in epidemiological research, it's quintiles, and then you're going to compare the top group to the bottom group. So, smoking, the people who smoke the most and the people who smoke the least, and the odds of getting cancer or something like that, it's often like quintiles. But this is tertiles, which is what they need to do because there aren't that many surgeons here. So dividing the participants into tertiles based on a demonstrated video game skill, meaning the top third best, the middle third, and the worst third. Comparing subjects from the top to the bottom, the top tertile made 47% fewer errors, P is less than 0.001, and performed 39% faster, P is less than 0.001, and scored 41% better, P is less than 0.001. Again, 47% fewer errors, 39% faster. The average of those two is not 41. So I don't know how they calculated the score. It doesn't make any sense. So let's just ignore the score, I guess. Because at no point did they say how it's calculated. But the players who are the best at video games, this to me, that is the most compelling analysis that they did. The players who are best are much faster and make fewer errors than the players who are demonstrably the worst. Okay, the next category is called regression analysis predicting laparoscopic skills. Again, they never mentioned regression in the methods. They just get to it. Now, regression is my favorite form of analysis. For the viewers at home, regression is prediction modeling, and there's a bunch of different kinds of regression. And so linear regression is what they use, which means your dependent variable, your outcome variable, is continuous. And we talked about what that means. It can take on any number of values. Hair length is continuous.
In this case, in this study, they're using the dependent variable as fewer errors and faster time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And given the so now if errors were like errors of consequence, you know, if you're doing a surgery and you make 314 errors, you should be in prison. You did it on purpose. That was an execution. That was not an operation. And so if you make like 2, 3 errors, you know, that's a different errors of magnitude. If that's what they were tabulating, it's a totally different regression, because in a given amount of time, how many errors do you make? How many instances of an outcome are there in a given amount of time? That's Poisson or negative binomial regression is what they would do. Now, if there's an average of 314 errors, like, okay, we'll just count that as continuous, and we're going to do linear regression here.
Okay.
So, and then time, sure, linear regression. And then if it was a likelihood, you know, the likelihood of a successful surgery, was the surgery a success? Did the patient live or die? You know, a binary outcome, that would be a logistic regression. So there are different regression models, and they're talking about linear regression, although I don't think they ever acknowledge that. They just talk about it. So they're testing the relationship between laparoscopic skills and demonstrated video game skills and past video game experience. The first 3 demographic variables, years of training, number of laparoscopic cases, and sex, did not predict variance in Top Gun scores. Now, I don't know how they ran this model, because there's no table showing the outcome, because if each one is tested individually, if you put sex in there as an individual predictor and do what's called a simple linear regression, you're going to get a different significance than if you put sex and years of training and number of laparoscopic cases in the same model. Because they're going to have what's called multi-collinearity. They're going to share explanatory power.
Can we back up just a little bit? So what they did was looked at the relationship between the skills, the laparoscopic skills, and demonstrated video game skills, and past video game experience. Can you explain that a little more in detail of like the statistical analysis?
Okay, so the dependent variable is Top Gun score. Now, I don't know if Top Gun score is that composite that they're looking at. It might say this, you know, I don't recall what I read. It might say what they what the dependent variable is, but maybe it's errors, but it's probably that. Composite score of the Top Gun. And what they're looking at is, does video game experience predict Top Gun score?
Okay, and then past video game experience predict Top Gun
so
score.
yeah, how you would do this is in the regression model, you would have a predictor. Sometimes this is called an independent variable. In most research, this is called an independent variable. In regression, it's called a predictor, even though it is an independent variable. However, you're probably going to have multiple predictors in one model that are not independent of each other. So that's what multicollinearity means, is they share variance, right? There's a correlation between them. So this predictor and that predictor are predicting each other, and each predicting that, but they're uniquely predicting that to some extent, and some of what they're predicting is the same thing. So let's think about like, okay, let's do an example for regression. Let's say real estate.
Let's use the 3 like they did, because they used 3. So the relationship between laparoscopic skills, video games.
I'm going to explain exactly this.
Okay.
But let's just an analogy that everyone will understand, as opposed to like laparoscopic surgical 3 hour. Let's do something that everyone's going to understand. Houses. Okay. I mean, we can have 3 categories. Let's do the 3 categories.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what you mean.
Yeah.
So let's do 3 categories. We have apartments, we have condos, and we have houses. Okay? And you're going to buy one. Okay? So in the regression model, you might categorically code these things and say, what's the average house value on Zillow? Well, you know, it's let's say it's let's say it's condos, houses, castles.
Okay.
Okay, because apartments mostly
So
are for
we
rent.
have 3 buckets: a condo, a house, and a castle.
A condo, a house, and a castle. And each one of those is going to be a higher home value.
So the price.
So the price. So in the regression model, let's say there are 25, because there should be 25 here. So let's just say there's 15. There's 15 and there's 5 in each.
Yeah. Make it simple.
Yeah. So there are 15 total units for sale on Zillow. 5 of them are a castle, 5 of them are houses, 5 of them are condos. You expect the houses to be more expensive than the condos, the castles to be more expensive than the houses. So that's a simple linear regression, and it will give you what's called an unstandardized beta.
So our dependent variable in this example.
Price. The dependent variable is price. The independent variable, it's okay to call it an independent variable if it's a simple linear regression because there's only one predictor. So it is independent of other predictors because there are none. So the independent variable or the predictor is type of abode. And your unstandardized beta might be $200,000.
Okay, wait, pause. What is unstandardized beta?
Unstandardized beta is for each unit increase in your predictor. So in this case, a unit increase goes
Is a dollar
from
or whatever?
No. So that would be the dependent
Okay,
variable.
okay.
So
A house.
the independent variable is the type of estate.
Yeah.
So it's a condo, and then it goes to a house, and then it goes to a castle. For each gradation increase, the unstandardized beta is in the units of measure what you expect to happen to your dependent variable. So if your unstandardized beta is $100,000, it's 100,000. Then it's in the units of measure are dollars, and as you go from condo to house to castle, each increment is expected to increase the house, the price by $1,000 or by $100,000.
Okay.
Now there's going to be error at each one of those. That's the expected mean value. There's going to be variance at each. Not all houses are $300,000 or $400,000 or whatever.
So it's not always going to be $100,000 in increments.
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of variance here. And how much of this explanation can be attributed to house type? There's these 3 buckets, as you put it.
Yeah.
How much of the variance in house price? Some houses are worth $50,000. Some abodes are worth $10 million.
Yeah.
That's a ton of variance in terms of house price and residence price. And what percentage of that variance can you account for by your predictor? That's your R squared. Now, in this case, condo, house, castle, 10% maybe, I don't know, of the total variance in the outcome can you account for. But you can include additional predictors in that one model. So let's say the next predictor you want to put in is number of rooms, number of bedrooms. The condo, some condos are going to have 3, some condos are going to have 1, some condos are going to have 2. In houses, some houses have 1 bedroom, some houses have 10 bedrooms. In a castle, I'm sure some of them have 1 or 2 bedrooms, but
First predictor was what again?
the first predictor
type of
is the
house
type of
or
estate.
Yeah.
The second predictor is number of bedrooms.
Okay. So inside this one bucket of a condo, now we have to split that bucket into 2 buckets, or however many
Yeah,
rooms.
let's say 1 and 2
Okay,
rooms, one,
yeah.
2, 3 rooms.
Okay.
And so now, we only had 5 houses in that bucket.
Yeah.
And so now we're saying, okay, one of them has 3 rooms, one of them has 2 rooms, and 3 of them have 1 room. Okay, we're getting a little lean in each one of these categories
Because
in
each
the
of
house.
those is just like one.
It's just one in each
Yeah.
one of these things.
Okay.
And then you go through houses and divide the 5 into their, and so then you can add in another predictor, and let's say it's like zip code, and you have, let's just say it's a binary zip code. This is above the poverty line, below the poverty line, or something like that.
So
Okay, now
categorical,
it's
yeah.
categorical. Now, I think condos is going to be more of them below the category, below the poverty line. Castles are probably all going to be above. Houses might be, give or take. And so you keep including these predictors, and in each of these little buckets, you have 1 or 0 predictors.
Yeah.
If you start to add too many, now if you have 1,000 castles and 1,000 houses and 1,000 condos, throw in 100 predictors.
But in our analogy, we're only having 5 of each.
We're only having 5 of
yeah.
each here, and so you get a little bit limited in how you get to categorize with the predictors. But the dependent variable is price,
Yeah.
and the unstandardized beta, what it gives you is, with each unit increase in your independent variable, your predictor variable. So if there's number of bedrooms, as you go from 0 bedrooms to 1 bedroom, as you go from 1 bedroom to 2 bedrooms, as you go from 2 bedrooms to 3 bedrooms, your unstandardized beta might be $30,000. It'll just read out as 30,000, but
Yeah.
it's $30,000 because
Yeah.
it's in the units of measure of the dependent variable. And so if your unstandardized beta is 30,000 for number of bedrooms, that means if the other things are in the model, holding those constant, holding the other predictors constant, every other predictor in the model, let's hold those constant, isolate the effect of number of rooms with each additional room in your estate, that expected price of your house increases by 30,000. Now, the overall R squared, if you have all that stuff in there, might be like 0.7. You might be explaining 70% of the variance. But you can include other things like square footage. You can, is it 1 story, 2 stories? There's a lot of things you can include.
Yeah.
If you have enough
Sample.
houses or whatever.
Enough,
If the sample is big enough.
a larger sample size, you can
Right.
use more predictors. Okay.
Yeah, and so you're going to get a p-value, you're going to get an unstandardized beta, you're going to get an R squared. The R squared tells you what percentage of the variance in your dependent variable can you account for by your collection of predictors. The beta is assigned to each individual predictor, and your beta is, here's the exact effect of this predictor on your dependent variable, holding all other predictors constant.
Now, what happens if the sample size, I know we use that analogy of buckets and houses. What happens if the sample size is, say, 15 and we're using 3 predictors?
Yeah.
Like we were
Now,
saying,
is it
rooms.
possible to get a trustworthy result here? It's possible.
Okay.
But it's not likely that you're going to get a result that's not biased by some component of the data. So there's no absolute minimum number that's accepted in the literature of number of subjects required per, in this case, number of houses or whatever, but number of patient or surgeons would be for this one. There's no absolute agreed number of number of these things required, number of subjects required for each predictor.
Yeah.
But 10 is a reasonable number.
Okay.
That's a reasonable minimum to say, look, here's what I'm gonna to try to have a nice analysis.
Yeah.
If I have 1,000 subjects, I can use 100 predictors in one model. If I cut my subjects in half, I'm going to cut my predictors in half. That's a reasonable number. Can you go under 10 and still trust your results? Circumstantially, you can.
Okay.
But you start to get into risky territory.
Okay, so we hope that helped explain a little bit about regression, because now we're going to get into their regression and
Yes.
what they did, and we'll kind of go into that.
Yeah, so into their results. Okay, so past video game experience, and the dependent variable is Top Gun scores here. But so the first thing again they did is years of training, number of laparoscopic cases, and sex did not predict a significant amount of variance in Top Gun scores. Okay, but that's 3, and did they test them individually or did they all test them in the same model? Because remember, if you have square footage and number of bedrooms in the same model, each of those are sharing explanatory power, and the p-values of them are going to go down because they are the same thing.
So in this case, if they use
all 3 in one model,
so the laparoscopic
number of
scales-
laparoscopic cases and years of training, those probably explain each other. Now, sex is probably irrelevant, but those two are explaining each other. If you have more years of training, you've done more cases. If you've done more cases, you probably had more years of training. And so that would explain why the p-value might not be significant in those ones. If they're doing them together, but they don't say whether they did them individually or together, but they
Yeah.
did not predict variance in Top Gun scores. Now, past video game experience, beta equals negative 0.11, p equals 0.03, and demonstrated skill, beta equals negative 0.76, p is less than 0.001. I'm going to stop mocking that. The previous one, that was reported correctly. Predicted a significant amount of variance in Top Gun scores after controlling for sex, amount of training, and number of laparoscopic cases. And then it says, note that lower Top Gun scores are better, which means a negative score implies a negative beta implies a better score. Now, they don't acknowledge that this is unstandardized beta. One just has to assume that it is. A standardized beta is how many standard deviations does this move? And it's sort of it doesn't really make any sense to anybody unless you are so intimately familiar with the values. Unstandardized beta is in the units of measure of the dependent variable. Now, I don't really know what the scores are, so it is kind of irrelevant. Is 0.76 a significant? I mean, it is significant, but is the magnitude worth acknowledging? A change of 0.76.
We don't know.
I have no idea.
They
I don't know
really
what these scores
explain
mean.
Top Gun scores.
Yeah. So I don't know if that is really good. Is that meaningless? Let's say this is physical therapy research, and it's Okay, we significantly improved glenohumeral range of motion. By how much? Half a centimeter. Well, I can't tell, right? Like, does the goniometer confirm that? Yes. Is it statistically significant? Yes. Does that help me reach the cereal in the high cabinet? I can't even tell the difference, right? But, oh, it's significant. That's at the equivalent of what they did. I have no idea what a beta of negative 0.76 means. And I'm assuming it's an unstandardized beta. Because they don't say. But so the assumption we're making, to no credit of the writers, is that past video game experience and demonstrated skill significantly improve Top Gun scores. It doesn't really say that. But here's the thing, after controlling for 3 other things. And so it appears that there's 5 things in the model for a sample that should only have 25 people in it. So the total sample, it appears to be 25. Maybe they're doing the 33, and if so, that's really inappropriate. That's the worst possible thing they could do. And so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they only use 25. I hope they only use 25. Otherwise, that's just fraud. But if they only use 25 and they have 5 predictors in one model, oh, we're getting lean.
Yeah.
We're getting really lean here. I mean, that's 5 subjects per predictor. Now, is it possible? Is it possible to have a linear regression analysis with 5 subjects per predictor? Yeah, it can be done. But it would be nice to just, let's not control. If those other things aren't significant, why'd you control for them anyway? It says years of training, number of laparoscopic cases, and sex did not predict a significant amount of variance in Top Gun scores. Then you don't need to control for them, really.
Yeah.
Leave them out of the model. Let's allow the variance to be explained by video games. So these models aren't good. The relative weight analysis of Johnson. Okay, so this is earlier. I said that like we have square footage of the house, how many bedrooms the house is, what kind of house it is it 2 stories or 1 story or 3 stories, or zip code, is it rich or poor or whatever. Each one of these is going to have a relative contribution to the explanatory power of that R squared. How much of that variance are we accounting for? Yeah. Each one of these is going to have a percentage of it explained. And so this is what this relative weight analysis of Johnson is doing. Reasonable thing to do here. And it demonstrated that video game skill accounted for the greatest amount of variance, 31%. And amount of past video game experience accounted for an additional 10% above and beyond that. So that's impressive. The number of laparoscopic cases performed and the surgeon's sex accounted for 2% of the variance, and years of training were unrelated to demonstrated laparoscopic skills, 0.3%.
And so if you remember back in the introduction, I think, our methods, we said, okay, well, if we were going in to have a surgery and you had the option of this surgeon has 50 years of experience, whereas this one only has 3, but he's really good at video games and that one's not. Which one are you going to pick? Without like reading all of this, you probably would have picked the 50 years of experience, but this is saying opposite.
Yeah, that 99.7% of the difference in skill is not explained by experience. Now, granted, they're not actually doing real live body skills and the success rate of the patient and whatever. I mean, this is Top Gun score. So, but the assumption is made that the Top Gun training system is a reliable assessment of surgical skill. Mm-hmm. The number of them, okay, we did that. 0.3% is driven by Top Gun. A total of 55% of the variance was unknown. So most of the variance in surgical skill was not known. But weird regressions, and I don't like how they did this, and nobody should. Okay, let's move into the discussion, which is called comment, but the conclusions are the discussion section. At first, they just summarize things, and this is what Joe Rogan was talking about, where it just says surgeons who had played video games in the past were for more than 3 hours a week made 37% fewer errors, were 27% faster, and scored 42% better than surgeons who had never played video games. So these are the headlines. Remember, headlines are never true.
It's clickbait.
It's clickbait. This is just clickbait in 2007, and studies have always done this, where if you want the truth of a study, you have to do what we're doing, where you look at the methods and results, and those are true if you can replicate them, they're true if you can understand them. And I can kind of understand parts of this. But the conclusions or the discussion, in this case is called comment, these are never true. This is marketing, this is a marketing campaign, can I get Joe Rogan to say it? And so they just exaggerate their findings. And,
I don't know if they're never true.
No, they're not never true, but they are They tend to.
They are more of like the headlines.
It's the headlines.
Sales pitch.
Yeah. And very frequently there's a lack of proportion, I'll say.
Okay.
Where they exaggerate the effect and they don't limit it to, I mean, surgeons who had played video games.
Yeah, that's the key there. That's the danger of that is like surgeons.
Yeah, so you mean
like
what kind of surgeon?
heart surgeons
yeah, it's
or-
right here with a laparoscope.
Yeah.
And you're using like a remote controller that looks like a video game controller kind. It looks like a sort of like a Wii remote. So it summarizes these things in really bad ways. There is the most powerful part of the conclusions. Obviously, was not going to be picked up by Joe Rogan, and it's the end or the second paragraph where it says regression analysis suggested that past and current video game capabilities were more important than traditionally recognized factors such as years of training and number of laparoscopic cases. The amount of time playing video games in the past was also a significant predictor of demonstrated laparoscopic skill. So to me, that's the most powerful part of the conclusions, but you have to know what regression is to understand that. So that's not a headline. That speaks to statisticians who are reading these things. And then the next sentence is, this is a correlational study, and therefore causality cannot be definitively determined. That's kind of the extent of their limitations. The rest of that paragraph is very vague catch-all limitations, but really the only kind of precise one, but it's not exclusively a correlational study. I mean, sure, we can put regression into correlational study, the correlations we're talking about, but if we're saying like t-tests and we're saying ANOVA, we're not looking at how correlated variables are, but how different they are. And so there's a slight, so think about what the null hypothesis of a correlation is, these things aren't related. The null hypothesis of an ANOVA is these things aren't different. This is just sort of semantics a little bit here, but I can take that to heart that they are acknowledging that this isn't like a randomized controlled trial where they kind of move forward with a intervention and measure differences in the intervention. But then it gets to the bottom of this page, and kind of who cares about the rest of this stuff because this is just marketing. But then toward the bottom in the last paragraph, it says, theoretically, game controllers could be designed so that they resemble laparoscopic instruments and other medical appliances. Now, what I think is true is the other way around. Video game controllers are way better than like surgical stuff. Like video game controllers, like, okay, we have a $250 billion industry here that's all about hand-eye coordination, and I mean they have all sorts of people. I mean the Wii controllers were like this guy for like aviation, who is really what it was like designed for, and then all right, let's incorporate this motion control in Nintendo Wii, and I mean like how much science goes into a controller, the ergonomics of the controller, the sensitivity of the controller, the capacities of the controller, the variability of capacities, and how the buttons are. Surgical tools aren't that sophisticated.
So what you're saying is we need some video game controllers.
We have video game controllers. Yeah, even if like a GameCube controller was pretty good, just use that. Nintendo Switch controllers, great. Use those in the lab. And the surgeries, you're not going to make 314 errors if you have like a Switch controller.
Yeah.
I definitely think that's the other way around. One thing it does acknowledge in the top paragraph of page 185, right, is the U.S. Army has recognized the benefits of video games for teaching skills and has licensed the popular violent video game series Rainbow Six to train its special operations forces. I don't know if they had to use the word violent there. But we see the military using video games for training, flight simulators for pilots. We see all of these conditions, and then nobody's talking about like, well, the surgeons should also be doing this. In the last paragraph here, it says, research on the amount of gaming has shown a negative correlation with school performance for adolescents and college students. Therefore, indiscriminate video game play is not a panacea. That's another limitation to acknowledge, is that just go play video games and your whole life is better in every way ever that you can imagine. Like, okay, but...
Well, I think it depends with the type of video games, the amount of time you're playing the video games.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of variables that go into that, but yeah.
Yeah, so there are a lot of variables that go into that. And we're going to, in the future, we're going to talk about... kids, right? Some of these future articles, they aren't all on surgeons, right? Yeah. And so we're going to get into some of these kid ones. Now, on the very last page, there is a kind of a rebuttal. It's an invited critique where an MD, Miriam J. Curate, maybe it's Curie, I don't know, whatever. I did look her up. She did her MD at Harvard. Okay, very, I mean, as prestigious as it gets for the MD. Her residency was University of Chicago, and that was between 1982 and 1989. It's worth noting that the original Nintendo came out in those years, and we start to see, the boom of video games in the United States, and she clearly missed it, because if you're doing a residency, you are every waking minute you are consumed, and then if you go into practice after, this is. She probably doesn't play video games. I didn't reach out to her and ask, but my hunch is she doesn't play video games. But she is still at Stanford, did her MD at Harvard, residency at University of Chicago, tons of publications, a lot of them on laparoscopic surgery. So she is, to an extent, she's qualified to evaluate this. My hunch is she doesn't have a strong statistical background, and that she's on the, the shows like House MD and Grey's Anatomy and whatever, they'll bring on MDs to say, not to help write the script and to say, well, I don't like Act 2. Like that's not what they're there for. Or the dialogue or rising and falling action, plot devices. The MDs aren't there for that. They're there to look at the medicine and say, is this right? Did I get it right? And so a lot of times that's what MDs are brought on board for research. I've worked with a ton of MDs, and it's not statistics that they're doing. What they're talking about is the medicine, are you discussing that correctly? Yeah. And can I just briefly tell a story of, I submitted a journal to pain medicine, and it was on survival in people with rib fractures. And I was looking at these different treatments and the odds of survival. And so odds of survival, what kind of regression? Logistic regression. It's the only regression you can do for the odds of an outcome. And so I submit this thing, and one of the MD, all the reviewers are MDs, and one of the MDs had never heard of logistic regression. So they said, really, you should be doing linear regression. And so that was the peer review process, right? It goes through a peer review process and it passes. But you get this like revise and resubmit, like change this to linear regression, because that was the one he'd heard of. And I learned the hard way. It did eventually get published, but I learned the hard way that I wrote back and I put humor in what I said, where I said, well, because death, I made a reference to The Princess Bride. Wesley is only mostly dead. And so in The Princess Bride, death is a continuous variable. But in real life, it's binary. You either live or you die. And linear regression can be applied in Princess Bride, but it cannot be applied like in Earth life. And so I made some little joke, and it was like all caps, I mean practically cursing, exclamation points. Oh no. And all the other reviewers accepted, and he was just irate. I'm assuming it's a he. I don't know. And it held it up for like a year because this person refused to accept my article. Now, it did end up getting published and has a ton of citations. I mean, it has like 20 times the number of citations that the impact factor of the journal is. Mm-hmm. And so it was a highly cited, impactful paper, but it was held in the review process for like a year because I insulted the MD who didn't understand statistics. So we have to be a little bit cautious in this stuff, but commonly MDs don't know statistics. But this invited critique, I would invite you to read it yourself. I'm not going to read it. They don't get into statistics, but there is some good commentary, things we didn't really talk about, some things we covered, but it's sort of topical commentary about the limitation of application, where I'll leave it up to you to decide, was Joe Rogan right?
Surgeons who regularly play video games make less errors. Look at this, 32% fewer errors, 24% faster, and scored 26% better overall than their non-player colleagues.
Oh, I believe that for
That's
sure.
incredible.
Well,
like that, you should be required in medical school to play video games. Imagine if there was a course that you could take. That course would promote, you would be 26% better.
Yeah.
Everyone would have to take that course.
Sure.
Why would you want a surgeon that's less prepared? You would say, hey, Bob, did you take this course? You didn't take this course. Don't you understand this course makes you 26% better?
Sure.
You would have to take it. Everyone should have to play video games if you want to be a surgeon.
Yeah, that all surgeons should be playing video games.
Yeah, it should be like mandated as a course in medical school.
From this study.
From this study. I'll leave it up to you. Mm-hmm. But that's it for our first
journal club.
For our first journal club. We're going to do more of these.
Maybe not as long, but thanks for tuning in with us.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. And I hope you learned. So, maybe you learned something about statistics. Maybe you learned something about video games. Maybe you learned something about both. People who are interested in video games and statistics, those are the people who watch to the end. So, okay. We'll see you next time.
Bye.